Okay, so today we're going to think about the speaking exam, and specifically we're going to think about working with an examiner. The first thing to think about is how to make an examiner comfortable. It's important to you that the examiner is comfortable so that they can concentrate on what you're saying without any distractions. This means there's some things you need to be careful about. Number one, about IELTS, please don't say what score you need. The examiner cannot make a decision based on what you need, and if you tell them the score that you would like, it puts them under pressure. You should also not explain how important IELTS is to you, the opportunities that it would give you. The examiners know that it's an important exam and want to do the best job they can to give you an accurate score. You also need to think about timing. The timing of the IELTS exam is very important. Each part of the test should last for a specific amount of time. It shouldn't be too long and it shouldn't be too short. This means that the length of your answers is important, and the examiner will show you with body language if you've been talking too long or not enough. If the examiner tries to stop you from speaking, it's probably to do with timing, and so stop to let them ask the next question they need to ask. Thinking about questions, the speaking test is a test of your speaking. It's not a real conversation. It's not a conversation where you will be asking the examiner questions. The way it works is that they ask the questions and you answer them. Because the examiner has to stick with the script that IELTS have given them, they can only say the things that IELTS have said they can say. It means if you ask a question, they cannot answer it, and it can be uncomfortable for them if you keep asking questions. If we think quickly about the structure of the speaking exam, if you've looked at other parts of IELTS Dojo, you'll know that there are three parts. Part one is an interview. And in this part, the interview will ask you some questions about two familiar topics. You're expected to give full answers, but your answers shouldn't be too long. A good way to think about if you've given a good answer is that the examiner shouldn't really have to ask why. When you answer a question, you should always explain your answer to some extent. Part two is the long term, where the examiner will give you a topic and you have to talk about it for 2 minutes. During this time, the examiner will not be asking you any questions, they'll just be listening. The last part of the exam is the interview. And again, the examiner will ask you some questions, this time connected to the topic that you talked about in part two. You're expected to give full answers in this part as well, explaining why you think what you think. In each part of the examiner has a different role. In part one, the examiner is like a robot. They have a list of questions that they have to ask you, and they cannot change that list in any way. In part two, the examiner is a listener. They will give you a topic at the beginning, but then they will just listen to what you say. In part three, the examiner is an actual human being and can ask questions about the topic, about what you said, that they find interesting. This means in each part of the exam, there's different things that the examiner can and cannot do. In part one, the examiner has to stick to the script. They have to stick to the questions that IELTS gave them. They cannot change what they ask you. So please don't Don't be worried if the examiner asks you a question you think you've already answered. You may have answered a question in part when you were talking about an earlier question, but the examiner still has to ask you the questions on the paper. So if you think you've already answered it, just answer it again. Also, you cannot ask the examiner to change topic. In part 1, the examiner will have 2 topics that they can ask you about and they cannot change. The only topic that you could ask an examiner to change is if it's to do with family, if there's some personal reason you do not want to talk about family on test day. But that's the only topic you can ask the examiner to change. You also cannot ask the examiner to rephrase the question. They cannot change the questions for you, but the examiner can repeat the question for you. You also, in part 1, cannot ask the examiner any questions. In part 1, the examiner does not have the freedom to answer any question that you ask. Moving on to part 2. In part 2, the examiner wants to listen to you talk. As in part 1, the examiner cannot change the topic. Once they have given you the topic, that's the topic that you have to talk about. If you have any questions about the topic, if you want to check something about the topic, you can ask the examiner a yes or no question. After they give you the topic, you will have 1 minute to plan what you want to say, so please use the time carefully. Think about useful vocabulary you could use to answer the question. Think about the areas that you want to talk about so that you'll be talking for long enough. When you're talking, pay attention to the examiner. If the examiner starts looking nervous, starts looking at their watch, it means that you're almost out of time. So finish your answer there. In the final part of the test, in part 3, the topic that you talked about in part 2 is extended. The examiner will ask you more questions connected to this topic, but it will get more general. Part 2, you will be talking about a personal experience. In part 3, you'll be thinking about things on a wider level. However, it is still not a proper conversation. The examiner has a selection of questions to ask you. It's still not the right time for you to be asking the examiner questions. However, they do have a little more flexibility than part 1. If you don't understand a question in part 3, the examiner can rephrase it for you. They can ask you the same question in a different way. So in part 3, if you don't understand, ask the examiner to change the question, to rephrase the question for you. At the end of the test, when the examiner says, and that is the end of the test, there are some things that you should and shouldn't do. Things that you should do. You should smile, you should thank the examiner, and you should leave. It should be very simple and very clean. Things that you really should not do: you shouldn't ask the examiner how you did, because they cannot tell you. You should not ask the examiner for your score, because they cannot tell you. On the test day, the examiner is working for IELTS. They're very highly trained to conduct the test in a certain way. If you understand what the examiners can and cannot do, it means that you can make sure you keep the examiner comfortable, you keep them relaxed, and that means that they can focus on the things that you say in the test. Thank you.